Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Jew and Gentile podcast. Steve, we're entering the Jew and Gentile podcast a little bit more somber than we normally do. Whoa, see, now it's exciting.
Way to go, Chris.
Sorry.
You take a moment, and then it becomes something else. Yeah,
We tried.
We did
We
try.
tried.
And it is somber, and it is sad. All of us are aware of what happened on Saturday. You awoke Eastern time. I was on the West Coast, actually doing a prophecy conference at PUC. And we were able to see images on the TV and hear news reports, and the rest is history, and we're following it. And, you know, in the sovereignty of God, Chris, and his providence, a mistake, and boy, don't we make mistakes.
Yes.
Well, we have somebody
I
who's
just made one.
That's right. We have a PhD, a guy who's an archaeologist, and he made a mistake. Or maybe it was Jim Showers. I don't know which one made the mistake, but because of that mistake, it turns out into a blessing.
It became our blessing.
Tell us who we have through that mistake.
Well, we are joined by Dr. Price and Mrs. Price. Hello, you two. Thank you for joining us.
Notice he called you Dr. Price and Mrs. Price. That you know what that means?
But first
we're in awe.
That's right.
yes, but first he called us a mistake.
No, I did that. I did that.
A blessed mistake.
Yeah.
No,
All
we're
right.
so thankful that you both are here. Thank you. Yes, this turns into a blessing for us.
Yeah, he got his days mixed up, or Jim got his days mixed up. He's supposed to be here tomorrow, even coming today, but he came yesterday. So we get him today to be able to really share his expertise. We're really happy.
Yes,
about
because you're going to add a level of expertise that Steve and I don't have.
way
at
above
all.
our pay grade.
100%.
Way above.
Well, we're thankful that you're here. And like I said to you earlier, normally our listeners who tune in they get exciting music. They hear a great time, a couple jokes in the beginning with Steve and I. But this isn't a time to joke because Israel is under attack and Israel is at war for the first time in 50 years. Randall, why don't you give us some insights? You've practically lived in Israel, I feel like, and you bring insights that Steve and I just don't have. Why don't you share with us some thoughts about what you see going on in Israel, the surprise attack that Hamas had on the Jewish state?
I think the biggest problem for the Israeli citizens is the feeling of the lack of security. You saw some people. I saw one video of someone being attacked, and they were basically saying, "Ein betach, ein bet." There's no security. Where's the security? And that's a fear because one reason the Jewish state existed was a refuge for people coming from the Holocaust, coming from around the world. They would have a safe haven in the midst of an anti-Semitic climate and certainly a Gentile world where they could practice their faith, where they could live normal lives. And that reality, is, or at least hopeful reality, has been shattered a bit by the surprise attack. Coming certainly on a Shabbat and coming on Simchat Torah, when they're celebrating God giving his Torah and a day of rest, extended rest from the holiday, which is why explains in some part the lack of some security, just like at the Yom Kippur War in 73. But also from the point of view that there's a great deal of misunderstanding, or at least lack of understanding, as to why this could happen, given the intelligence, given all that Israel is famous for in terms of the knowledge of their borders, and particularly with Gaza.
Well, you alluded to the Yom Kippur War. It's in a lot of ways there is similarities, and same thing happened with in 1973 with Golda Meir, and the knowledge that they had of something coming, and the strife and stress of not doing anything, and then all of a sudden being overrun. And here it is, a holiday, Simchat Torah, as you said, and then the idea of this no one knew and the surprise attack. You give us some insight as to the surprise. You know people there. You probably have talked to some people there. Do you have any testimony of the things that happened?
Well, because the invasion was on kibbutzim and to people invading people's bedrooms in their house, and children hiding under beds and being pulled out, or watching parents and grandparents killed right in front of them. And worse things happening. People have been looking into the background of horrible brutality and mutilation of bodies and all of these things that violate Jewish sacredness of the body anyway. But all of these things just are added shock factor. So there's a surprise in that it happened and when it happened and where it happened in some of these smaller kibbutzim communities. But the fact that it was overwhelming, and then the level of aggression that was seen. When you see some of the videos of people just escorting elderly people and people around as though they normally would, they realize in a moment later those bodies are going to be laying on the ground. It's something that I think we can't understand because we don't know the mentality behind it. I think we just think, well, these are just very cruel people. It's far deeper than that. It's something we ought to probably explore a little bit.
You want to kiss your mic. Make sure, move it closer to you, kiss your mic, and they'll be good.
Well, I just want to say, I do want to explore that. I'd like to rewind for a moment, though, because you had talked about the fact that it was Simchat Torah and it was Shabbat. Now, most people, they don't understand maybe what's going on with Shabbat. In our, thank you, Laura, I really appreciate that. They don't understand what's going on during Shabbat in America. Can you describe really quick so that people understand what Shabbat is for the Israeli culture? And it really doesn't matter whether you're, oftentimes I think your mind goes to, oh, this is for the religious. It's not, Shabbat isn't just for the religious. No. It's an Israeli part of the week that most people do the same events for the most part. Some more religious, some more secular, but it's not like they ignore Shabbat or Sabbath. Can you share with that a little bit in light of the attack that took place?
Yeah, I think we have to remember that they just have one day off. Sunday is a work day, and so they've progressively taken Friday also as an extra day. But it's that one focused day for family, for reflection, for just putting everything away. But you put even secular and atheist to a degree, just say, I'm going to practice what I've known growing up and what everyone does. So cell phones are usually off. Maybe a television is left on and someone watches something. But for the most part, there's little communication. It's just basically a day of rest, a day of family, but not of extensive travel. There's some of that, but not much. So you can understand, especially coming off of a high holiday, the last of the high holidays, in which you've had more of an extended kind of wrap our Christmas, our Easter, our Thanksgiving, everything together. And now you have this one last day before things are going to end. And so you maximize that in this case on a Shabbat.
And I know from my time being over there for, doing volunteer work on Shabbat, it's not just the people that are going and resting. Everything. I mean, they close the businesses down. Only the Russians have a grocery store open, and they're not kosher. And so you have all of these businesses that are closed down. Everything shuts down in the country on Sabbath, and that's important because that's when they attacked.
Yeah, with the first Yom Kippur, that's a different thing where the whole country is immobile entirely, and that's why people would come back from reserve status or from active duty or whatever, and that was a perfect time when everything was at a standstill, and it took more time to mobilize your troops and get them back in the field. So they did that. Now, but that wasn't the case here, except that it was that. I mean, for the Islamic agenda was not so much that it was a Shabbat, that it was the exact day of the first surprise attack, the Yom Kippur War of 73, and because it was also other dates important. It was the date of the assassination by Palestinians of Anwar Sadat, who had made a peace plan with Israel. It was a number of other Palestinian attacks on a cruise ship or other things that happened. All of that's symbolic for them because it says this is when it happened once. We repeat it, and it happens again. See it as part of a flow of history.
Steve, you want to add something?
Well, we think about all the things that have happened during this time. I think about how early it was in the morning. I think about the fact that it was in a kibbutz. Most of the kibbutzim, but not all of them, are not religious. There are some that are. And the films that I saw were the way they were able to get in. There was one that I saw where they were able to get to the main watch station, the security station, and they shot into a car where the guard was, and they were able to press the button, bring people in, and then they systematically went into the home since it was early in the morning and either came in and shot them, or if they were in their safe rooms because they heard things, they would burn it and wait till they came out. It's shockingly like the Holocaust. There's lots of things that are the same. And to the psyche of the Jewish person who would be there, in fact, one of the captives at least was a Holocaust survivor. Yeah. It took them a while. It's taken us a while to comprehend just the butchery, the animal kind of behavior that had to have, unless you go back to the Holocaust, because they did the same thing. You did our chapel, and you mentioned that these folks were able to come in and kill kids, behead little babies, and then go to their homes and celebrate their children. That's exactly what happened when Jewish people were in concentration camps. You would have the guards and the leaders there do terrible things and then celebrate Christmas on the same property with their family. Would you comment and tell us, this is not just a secular war. We forget that. And you were telling our staff about the religion involved here. Could you comment about that a little bit?
Yeah, this is very much part of holy war, jihad, which, by the way, they've been calling for at the same time. Our media tends to downplay that because they don't want to talk about religion. Religion is a personal thing. In our countries, for the most part, we separate politics and religion, but not so in the Islamic world. They're all one. They're merged together. And so they have, as part of Quranic teaching, that a dehumanizing of the Jewish people. It also applies to Christians.
You actually know Quranic verses that talk about that.
Yeah, this is where Allah punished the Jewish people, they would say, for their idolatry, for the things that they had done in the past. But they of course, leave out the fact that God, while he brought divine discipline and punishment, he also promises restoration and future. That's all gone in their viewpoint. But this is a punishment in which he turned people into apes and pigs, two detestable animals for Islam.
Just like the Nazis did.
The Nazis they dehumanized them as well,
yeah,
and talked about them being vermin or various other things, infestation, all of this type of thing. And so the same ideas there. I've been in many Islamic countries where I've seen the way they treat animals, little puppies, that just kick them across the room. They have no regard for that. They slaughter animals. They're used to killing, sheep and goats and things. This is what ISIS did. This first time we were aware of it, but they were doing it on that basis because people were like cattle. And this is what's been happening here. So from very early ages, they have to be indoctrinated in the belief that God has taken the Jewish people and made them a type of cancer, a type of disease, a type of inhuman beings that basically deserve to be annihilated. That's why you hear the term annihilated, because it's a genocidal thing. And Hamas's own charter calls for the complete destruction of Israel, all Jewish people. So there's no possibility of reconciliation. But we don't understand the depths of this depravity, but it's based on religious conviction.
Yes.
And then it gets down to the problem of, well, is one religion better than another? Well, certainly they are. One is evil, one is good, one is right, one is wrong. We have to make that decision because they can't both be right.
Yeah. I want to know your thoughts on President Biden's response to it. I thought when I listened to it, I am thankful that he attacked Hamas directly. And he even, which I've never heard him do before, I've never heard him attack the charter. He attacked the charter, which I thought was very good. Maybe you could highlight that charter, because I don't think people realize that Hamas actually has its own constitution, and it is to destroy Israel. It has its own charter, and the existence of why these people even have power in Gaza is for one sole reason, and that is the destruction of Israel.
Right. No, the charter says that this is not a political problem. It is not a national problem. It's a religious problem at the core. And so therefore, it cannot be changed. It's an ongoing, until it's done, calling for the destruction of Israel. With the President Biden, he, like others, want to separate the Palestinians from a more extreme or radical element. So Hamas, when they were given autonomy, the Palestinian Authority was given autonomy in Gaza by Ariel Sharon as a trade-off for negotiations on Jerusalem. He wanted to not have Jerusalem on the discussion for negotiation, a secondary thing, but not primary at the time. So he said, let's trade land for peace, in this case, Gaza. And so the PA took control of it. But then Hamas entered and were basically attacking the Palestinian Authority, taking leaders, throwing them off of high buildings, and they fled and went to other places, Ramallah. So Hamas has occupied Gaza, and they have deliberately kept the population in a state of deprivation. So when the world looks at this, they say, oh, it's the Israelis who have occupied. It's the Israelis who are causing the suffering of the Gazans. No, it's Hamas.
It's Hamas
that's doing this with purpose, okay? So the president is right in making that kind of distinction, but it keeps also him being able to keep to his agenda of saying we support the Palestinians and the Palestinian state.
That's right.
The hopeful state.
Because the problem, too, is that ideology, it might not be in every Palestinian in Gaza or every Palestinian in the West Bank, but that ideology actually even crosses borders. And there are Israeli Arabs, Muslims, that are taking up the call of fighting against the Jewish people. And they have Israeli citizenship. It's not just something that's bound, I think for the person listening, it's not an ideology that's bound to Gaza. This is also in the West Bank. Of course. This is spread all throughout.
Yeah, so Hezbollah in the north is involved, or Islamic Jihad, or there's many others, but you've had imams in East Jerusalem calling for their people to take up arms and kill a Jew wherever they could find them. And this is not necessarily Hamas. This is simply that same Islamic ideology that's capitalizing on what they hope will be a wider regional support by Muslims.
This was a question I asked Dr. Showers, Jim, when this happened on Saturday. A lot of times what happens in with the Israeli-Hamas conflict that's been going on for quite some time now, for several years, more than a decade. You look and you realize this is almost as much, it's a real battle, but it also becomes as much a PR war, a public relations war. And, I think Friends of Israel has been shouting from the rooftops, as well as the Israeli government and other organizations, that Hamas is a real problem. But the moment that Israel gets the opportunity to go in and take care of the issue, all of a sudden the world cries out and says, stop. Do you think this is an outworking of never actually being able to take care of the Hamas issue because of the world pressure that they've had over the years?
Well, add to that the backers of Hamas, which is Iran. All right, so Iran, we're trying to curry favor with Iran. We think stability in the Middle East depends on Iran being able to have certain freedoms in terms of developing itself they say for humanitarian purposes, which
Yeah.
we know is not the case. But so that's a hot potato right now. You can't indict Iran. Just yesterday, Hamas publicly thanked Iran for their support of this attack.
Let's go back to Iran really quick too, because I always think it's interesting that the politicians on both sides of the aisle, but definitely the Democratic Party, they seem to want to make a deal with Iran to stop their nuclear ambition. But at the same time, this is a perfect example that the behavior is there. They want to try to stop a nuclear Iran, but Iran is fully supporting proxy wars all throughout the Middle East that target Israel. They're up in, like you said, northern Lebanon. They're in the West Bank now. They're in Gaza. But they're so focused on the nuclear component, they're not actually focused on the behavioral component, which we see get played out just last Saturday.
And it's kind of amazing how people either ignore or downplay the very obvious statements that are repeated over and over again. Death to America, the great Satan. Death to Israel, the little Satan. Mm-hmm. Over and over again. I mean, do we not think they mean what they say? I
think that's a very important point. Listen to the words. I think that's going to be a lesson that's going to come out of this, a refresher. But, let's go back a little. Chris, you were a little younger at the time, but I could tell you, in fact, you weren't born at the time. Gaza comes out of Egypt. It's part of Egypt at one time. Actually, if you go back further than that, it's under the Ottoman Empire, right. And then it's under the British, and then it's under Egypt. And when you trace how we got here, Hamas is called Islamic resistance. We need to remember Islamic resistance. And in history, in 1993, a famous shaking of hands in Washington, D.C., Yasser Arafat so happy, oh, yes, smiling, and President Clinton is pushing the prime minister. You got to go shake his hand. I'm sure you remember that. And at the same time, Yasser Arafat goes back and he speaks in Arabic and says that's when the Intifada would really begin, right after the Oslo Accords.
Right. So
you have this terrorist organization, Hamas, which you might want to comment. I'm not sure to what extent your knowledge is, but the Muslim Brotherhood is the roots of Hamas.
And Egypt. Yep.
And would you like to comment on the Muslim Brotherhood at all?
Well, it poses itself as a moderate Islamic cause, but it's as radical as all of them. And all those who've led the Muslim Brotherhood ultimately have made those statements and sided with the organizations that are attacking Israel. So there's really no difference whatsoever between them because the ideology is the same, unites them.
Exactly. So you have this piece of property, Chris, that's 140 square miles.
Yeah, it's not big.
It's not big at all. It's about double the size of Washington, D.C., double the size. And it's got 2 million people cramped in who the Israelis demonstrated, we know that you're cramped there. They used to have, after the 67 war, which 6-Day War, which gave them Gaza, Israel went to Egypt and said, you want it back? Egypt said, no, we don't want it back. And so they were willing. They used to have an airport. They were involved in the fishing industry. But because of the activities of the radical Muslim terrorists, for security purposes, those things had to be done away with because they were not using the airport for tourism. On the beach, they could have been like Beirut, but they didn't want to do that for their people. And so it becomes an enclave where the Israelis, for security, had to cut it off. And so what happens in 2005? Ariel Sharon, who, quite frankly, I disagreed with Ariel Sharon. He's a great general, but he pulled everybody out. And for those of our listeners who might remember, and I know you do, there were Israeli soldiers going into Gaza in areas where they had their settlements that were little communities and pulling them out,
I remember
kicking and screaming that Israelis were yelling at Israelis, don't do this. My home is here. I've lived here the whole time. and they pulled them out.
Were there rocket attacks coming into Israel when Israel had control of Gaza between 1967 and 2005?
There was bad activity coming out. I don't remember rockets.
I don't remember that either. As soon as you have Israelis out of Gaza, the Palestinian Authority moves in. They burn the synagogue.
They burned them.
They demolish everything that's there. I'm just thinking, too, about the modern situation with Israel calling for those in Gaza to leave in view of their siege and impending attack. Where are they going to go?
Yeah, the Sinai. If Egypt opens the border.
But Egypt doesn't want them.
Yep.
Absolutely doesn't want them. And they will actually treat them worse than they've been treated by anybody.
People don't realize that Egypt actually, they closed, I believe it's the Rafah border between the Sinai Peninsula. They don't want them in there because that's where El-Sisi the president of Egypt is trying to deal with the rise of training for Hamas and these terrorist organizations are happening in the Sinai. You flood them in there, it's only going to continue to help that training for the terrorists.
Chris, when we think of there are already calls now of peace, let's calm down and let's pull back. And Israel tested it out with their disengagement. Disengagement of letting them rule. So what happened when they let them rule? There was a business, a $40 million business that the Israelis left behind. They handed them the keys.
Hotels, all kind of things.
They gunned it down. They blew it up. Again, not all the people, but the radicals.
They were going to the Israelis were going to train them to use this agricultural industry that the Israelis built so that the Palestinians had money coming in, some source of income, and they burned it all.
That's right. So in light of the experience that has already happened in the past, and in light of the just intensity of this attack and the brutality of it, you have a prime minister and, quite frankly, an administration that is saying to the world right now, at least, we're not stopping. And in fact, something different that Israel did that I don't know, you might want to comment on this. Israel normally does a knock-knock on a building. They send texts. They send a non-powerful thing down that says, we're coming to get you. You better get out. Now, they give a mass statement, we're coming, and you got to find a way because it doesn't matter who's there.
Yeah.
This is infuriating people, but Dr. Price, what else could Israel do if they don't want this kind of violence upon their people?
Well, there has to be a decisive act that finishes this for good. If you don't, you're not going to eliminate Hamas. There are many other places they can't reach, but you can eliminate it right on your own borders. Mm-hmm. And that's where they have access to sea, access to air, all that can be cut off. There's a certain punitive measure necessary because it's been stated over again that radical forces don't respect weakness; they prey on them. History has taught us that much. So you've got to have a strong response. First off, the Israeli population demands that. How can you allow these things to go on and just with a slap on the wrist and say, well, we'll overlook it? No, the measure of brutality that's happened argues for a very strong response.
Let me just ask this, Chris. I want to transition in an important way because we have an expert here.
I know.
And so Dr. Price, when I go to churches and we do prophecy, oftentimes in the audience are folks who are looking for answers. And are there indications in modern news, and how does it stack up with prophetic implications? And this is it's a very good question, and it's very important. There's some TV people who are out there, and they read the news to their people, and then they interpret the Bible through the lens of the newspaper. We don't do that at Friends of Israel. You don't do that. Will you give us some practical aspects and how prophecy if at all, ties into what we're living right now?
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to understand about prophecy is that the events that are prophesied will take time to unfold. There has to be a preparation stage. And so the stage is being set now for what's going to happen in the future.
I hear that a lot. Staging, important.
Yeah, that's right. For us, as we interpret the Bible, we recognize that the signs that are for the future represent a time called the tribulation, which will take place after the time we believe is the rapture of the church. So it's not something we will ourselves see here on earth if we believed in Jesus as the Messiah.
So when will the rapture take place, Dr. Price?
Well, it's going to take place before these sign events take place,
Good
Which
one.
could be when?
which could be any time.
Okay.
You're bad, Steve. You're bad.
Because
we need to know that in any moment snatching away of the church is the way the church has lived for 2,000 years. We need to know that.
But here's the caveat. While the rapture is a signless event, it's an imminent event. At the same time, there are events that follow the rapture. So if the rapture had happened earlier in history, before, let's say, the state of Israel returned to the land of the Jewish, you could say, well, it's going to maybe take 50 to 100 years for these events to happen before what we have this time we call the 70th week of Daniel, the tribulation. But we've been seeing the stage being set, more and more actors brought on the stage. It's like the curtain's ready to go up now. So that time is being shortened. So as we look to see what's happening with events like this, for instance, it's my personal interpretation that something like the Battle of Gog and Magog, which you see at Ezekiel 38:39, it has certain players that come on the stage. Iran is one of those, called Persia. The area to the north, which was ancient Scythica, and my interpretation of Rosh and other things, that would be modern-day Russia. And then you have clearly these different names of Torgama and all these others that are part of modern Turkey. Okay.
So these are names in the Bible that are players. They're in the news right now.
Oh, absolutely. And not only that, they have announced over and over again for at least the last decade military alliances. They've had joint operations. Turkey has come out very vocally saying that Jerusalem is the center of their concern, that they want to support the Islamic causes in Jerusalem. You've had the same thing in Iran. Iran has repeatedly said this type of thing. And then Russia, which doesn't really have any stake in these kind of issues, wants to control more things in Europe and is using the Middle East as a means to get there. And they have these alliances. So whatever Iran does will be supported by Russia. Whatever Turkey does will be supported by Russia and by Iran. Well, if an invasion of Israel is staged, or at least on the horizon because of events that are happening now, because Iran is backing Hamas, if that is attacked and then someone says we need to get to the real source of this, cut off the head of the snake, then you're talking about Iran. Well, this could be something that projects into a nuclear conflict or draws many nations involved. That could be the precursor to this very invasion.
I think
spoken
that's
of in the future.
I think that's important that you explain. So when Christians look at what's happening, I think the best thing to say is God in his providence and sovereignty is lining things up on a continual basis. We're just seeing things come a little faster and closer than in previous times of the church. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. I think we always say it could be this.
Yep.
We have to be careful. But we have the clear scriptural understanding of events. I mean, there's a lot of details there about what's going to happen. And it's phenomenal that it's lining up the way the scripture said, 2,500 years ago. So it's the type of thing where we can look at that and gain some confidence that God is in control. He's moving things in a direction. How soon we get there, of course, is up to him.
To me, the safest place in the world to be is Israel. Even talking right now today, the safest place to be. Chris, I don't know if you agree. I've always said that. Safest place. You know why? Because God promised they'd be there. He didn't promise America we'd be there. We don't have any idea where America's going to be. So if you're in Israel right now, And we're praying for you, and it's difficult, but I'm telling you, it's always the safest place because God promised it always will be there. There'll always be a people of Israel, and there'll always be the land of Israel.
The divine preservation of the Jewish people is one of the great witnesses of God's power throughout history. You have all the nations that came against Israel in the past are all gone.
All the Hittites, all the ites, they're all
That's
gone.
right.
They're all gone.
They're all gone.
But Israel lives, and that is a dramatic testimony of the fact that God has a purpose and a plan for Israel. So you're right. There's no promise to America that it will last or any other European country, but we have a future for Israel and a particular future for the city of Jerusalem.
Preach it.
Dr. Price, how does Psalm 83 fit into this?
Good question,
What we're
Chris.
seeing unfold in front of us.
Well, in my opinion, it doesn't, because I don't see it as a prophecy. All right, it's not geared as a prophecy. Some of the because of the statement that keep Israel from being a nation again, or destroy them. From these are things in the mouths of some of the current aggressors against Israel.
Yes,
and it would seem like the Psalms 83 war is going to come. But a lot of the players in Psalms 83 don't exist today. They're no longer a people. And it's very hard to relate them to any people. And we don't have Edomites. We don't have others like this. So you can't really do that. And while I believe the Psalms have messianic content and therefore many of them are prophetic, not all of them are prophetic. So I'm more careful to say I don't think it's a prophecy. Certainly the attitude of the past is the attitude of the present. You talk about anti-Semitism. It's been here as long as the evil one has been here, fomenting that in the hearts of people to come against God's people.
Psalm 83, I interpreted the same way as you. It's not. Some people like to say it's a prophetic battle. I've never seen it that way. I see it as the heart of anti-Semitism.
Yes.
From the beginning of time till the very end as well. So there is some prophecy connected to it, but it's not an actual event. That anti-Semitism will continue on until the Lord Jesus
returns. Let me read it,
returns.
Chris, and just so we have some sometimes we dance around the word. It's just the first three verses, and that was such a great question. And I really appreciate Dr. Price's answer. Do not keep silent, O God. Do not hold your peace, and do not be still, O God. For behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people and consulted together against your sheltered ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. That is a condition that has existed from the time that God called the Jewish people the apple of his eye, the chosen people. It's a time that Jewish people, when they read it, almost all of us for the first time, I wish he would have chosen somebody else who needs the aggravation. Why does he choose us? That's true, but yet that's the condition, and this is just another example, horrible as it is, another example of Psalm 83, that condition of anti-Semitism, that condition, whatever God loves, Satan hates. And I'd like you to comment a little, if you would, on the satanic attack that it's not just Jewish people, it's the church. Whatever God loves, Satan hates. Can you comment a little bit about the war that really is being fought that we don't see?
Well, this is called the invisible war, but it's not so invisible because we see it manifest everywhere.
Yeah.
The very fact that from the beginning, Satan, who knows the end already, he knows Scripture better than most people know Scripture. He's aware, but he's also somehow convinced because he is he's a liar and the father of lies. So he's deceived himself. He's a deceiver. He's also one who's a destroyer. So by his very nature, he deceives and destroys. And that's all he can do. He's locked into that. He can't move outside of that. He was determined when he made his choice to reject all that he knew, and he knew God face to face and left that. There's no going back. And so throughout history, as he watches the messianic purpose unfold, as he sees God's people in God's land trying to have a witness for God among the nations, which is the nation's destiny, that they will be blessed through the Jewish people, he has attacked that in every way possible. He's attacked it in terms of trying to disrupt that seed from even becoming the Messianic seed. He's tried to, in many ways, corrupt the seed.
Yeah.
So you're talking about from Genesis 3:15 and then Genesis 6.
Yeah, all the way through. So, and you can see God said very clearly, I've chosen you among all the nations of the world. I've known you among all the nations of the world. Therefore, he says, I will punish you for all your iniquities. The issue here is, to whom much is given, much is required. And so while Israel has been blessed and will be blessed above all nations, it also will be disciplined above all nations because of that accountability that it has. Satan has known that. He knows God's character, that God has to be consistent with that. And so he has led the Jewish people into many avenues, idolatry, complaints, whatever it be, and which will bring about divine justice. At the same time, God has that overworking program. I support Israel. I've made promises to Israel. This is my land. This is my people. It will come out the way I intended. So we have that unique situation today where you have a promised land and a promised people, but you also have them under current divine judgment because of the rejection of God and the Messiah. So he will work that out, but Satan is using that at the present time as well. Part of that is this deep anti-Semitic hatred, not just of the other or the foreigner, but in this case of the Jewish people. And the only way you could explain as anti-Semitism is that it's because it is against God, because Jewish people represent God. There's no other, they're his. And for that reason, they're attacked by those who do not know God or are opposed to any program, even if they don't understand it themselves. Somehow, deep within themselves, that's what causes that reaction.
You know, it segues back to what you started off by saying, that the Jewish people were kind of taken back because they felt they were secure. The Holocaust happens 3 years later. The Jewish people have their homeland, and they've been able to defend it. Satan is the one that's been attacking all this time, and to have these kind of organizations, which we believe, any organization that where their religion is saying kill the Jews from the river to the sea, the person behind that hatred has to be Satan, and that's why it must be so difficult for the Israelis at this time, because they thought they had a safe haven, and it doesn't feel that way anymore.
And it also needs to be recognized that anybody that supports the Jewish people, whether it be righteous Gentiles at the time of the Holocaust or organizations like Friends of Israel, who seek to in some way support and encourage the Jewish people at this time, they're going to be subject to that same attack.
Yeah, Elwood McQuaid, who's 93 years old, when he travels around, when he was traveling around as our executive director, his wife Maxine, as he would go to various Israeli things, she said, "Why don't you just put a target on your front of your shirt? Just let it be. Just put the target there." and what you're saying, we could joke about it, and he joked about it, but that's in fact the righteous Gentiles were willing to put their lives on the line to hide Jewish people at the expense, and in some cases it happened, of their own lives. And that's what happens because Satan hates whatever God loves.
You talked about prophecy. In the future, Matthew chapter 25 says that when the Son of Man returns, sits on his throne, he's going to bring all the nations before him. It'll be a time of judgment, of separation of, again, the righteous among the nations and those who are not. The standard for that judgment is when you did this to the least of these brethren of mine. As I understand it, already there's been the national repentance and then, shall we say, salvation of Israel. They're all standing by around the throne. Here is the Gentile nations brought up. And the test that will determine whether some go into the kingdom or some go into everlasting punishment is based on what they did to those Jewish people.
Isn't that interesting?
And so during the tribulation period. So these are people who basically have to lay down their life to help the Jewish people in a time of persecution that's coming.
Can I divert really quick? I would like to find out, just so that our people can get a grip on, Israel when this attack happened, Israel was a divided country. They were politically divided. I mean, we're talking split in two. A lot of turmoil. What do you think is going to happen with the Knesset as a result of this attack? Number one, it seems as though Israel's unified right now, at least from what I'm reading coming out of the news. And they still have their differences, but they have a different agenda right now where they unify under that agenda. What's going to happen to the Knesset, though, which is the parliament of Israel? What do you think the future is of that?
I think it all depends on how they do their analysis of the intelligence failure, how this disaster happened. If you remember back in 1973, Golda Meir was ready to resign over this. So there were calls for that. And Benjamin Netanyahu seems to have been doing things or be part of that failure. So that could be a difficulty for him.
There are people predicting he's done already once it's over. There are.
So this, we don't know. I mean, Bennett went and joined the military
That's amazing.
That was a good move.
It's a good move, but it's hard to say. Your religious parties are behind a lot of this, and it depends how much they want to stress what needs to be done to secure Israel at times like this.
Yeah, and it's tough, too, because a lot of the non-religious Israelis have a hard time listening to the religious Israelis who never actually served in the military because they're exempt from it. So that's where a lot of the tension is in that. How can you tell us how to fight a war when you never were in it to begin with? Not all religious people, but that's a policy they have. If you're religious, it's an option of whether or not you want to serve in the military or not.
I think the election's going to go, once this is over, and we pray it's soon and it's decisive on the part of Israel. But once it is, I don't know how it's going to play out, but I think there's going to be some cleaning out of some reps. Israelis this has shaken them, and that the way to answer it is through your vote. And I don't know which way it's going to go, but look, you can't, when you feel like you're frustrated and you can't, how do I change this? You look to the top and say, look, I go to sports. If your team loses 100 games,
right,
you're not going to put the same people out there and say, "Oh yeah, let's trust them. Look at what we got." Yeah. It's not going to happen that way. And
talk to Bill Belichick, right?
That's a good example of people.
Everything was going great with Bill.
It doesn't matter what you did for me. What have you done for me lately? And that's how change happens.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll tell you another interesting thing I'm watching, because this is not mentioned in the media, but the cause of this attack, it was something from the past and is still ongoing. It's the Temple Mount. It's the holy sites.
Yes.
And this is what Hamas and others announced. They called this a victory in the battle for Jerusalem, and have called it a flood of attack against Jerusalem. Well, we've already seen a lot of secular support, really an overwhelming secular support for the Temple Mount, which didn't exist in the past. And the reason is because
you're saying secular Israelis.
It's secular Israelis.
Wow.
Because
that is a change.
While they're not religious, their support is the fact that we have sovereignty in this country and over Jerusalem, which is our city from 3,000 years, yet we have no access to this site. Jews are being forbidden. And so I think that's been part of the support for Jews being able to go to the Temple Mount to pray, which is against the status quo. The status quo's been gone a long time with the building of new mosque and other things. All right, so what comes out of all of this, if it's understood that this whole attack, this whole agenda was based on that, might be a softening of a position within the Knesset to consider opening that Temple Mount up or changing its policy. We don't know. I mean, that's considered a provocation for the entire Islamic world. But it may be that doesn't matter anymore. And if that's the case, then we really are going down a prophetic road. So,
You know,
Wait, Chris.
sorry, go ahead. You're my boss. You always get
the. When Dr. Price brings up Jerusalem and the temple.
Yeah, bada bing, bada
Do you
boom.
know? I think Dr. Price and God are in competition with who wrote more about the temple.
His book
I
on the
have
temple
one
is
book
bigger than the Bible.
I use it to flatten out papers that have become wrinkled. That book, it took me like 6 months to get through that book. You know a lot about the temple and a lot about prophecy. In fact, Chris, tell them how they could get. Well, first, tell us you have Jerusalem and prophecy and the temple as well. A book about, I just call it the temple book, but it has a full name. What's the name of it?
well, first I'm amazed you read so slow.
Wait, you don't know I graduated in the top 10% of the lower third of my class.
Yeah.
So that's why it's slow. But Chris, here at Friends of Israel, we sell that book, and it is, yes, it took me forever. I confess, it took me forever. But it's a great book. It gives you great insight. And we sell a couple of Dr. Price's books, and we should tell them how they can get it.
Yeah, we'll put all the links for all of your books that we sell on our show notes so that people can access all of your materials.
He's an archaeologist.
Oh, my goodness. I actually, Dr. Price, I was looking up, because you are the president of World of the Bible, which you can go to worldofthebible.com. But
He's amazing.
But this is the first picture. It's him popping out of a cave doing archaeological work. It's my favorite. You are the man.
I've been to his house when he was living in Virginia. The guy has more stones in his house, that back then at least, than the museums have. You went down to the basement. It's like, how do you dust those kinds of things? Anyway, how could they get his
He's
book?
ready to get out of
Well,
here.
now, my wife is here, so
I know.
you can ask those kind of questions.
How does he
to
do
her.
it?
How does he do that? Oh, she's not answering.
She doesn't want to answer.
She's saying, this thing is making me crazy.
Well, I do want to ask, before we let you tell people how they can access everything that you're doing, Dr. Price, I would like to, you said something important about the temple. The temple is in the West Bank, and a lot of people are saying one of the reasons...
Judea,
Samaria, exactly. Sorry,
we don't use the West Bank here.
that's true. Though Judea, Samaria, which is also called the West Bank for those Americans who don't know what that means.
That's right.
And so when you were talking about the temple, it brought to mind that a lot of analysts are saying the reason this attack happened is because Israel's energies were invested in terrorism in the West Bank. And so there was, a lot of the energies were invested there and not on the Gaza border at the time. Can you speak to that? Because it also highlights that the battle is not just in Gaza. It's actually even closer to Jerusalem. There's been a lot of recent terrorist activity in the West, in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, that is going to be important to the understanding Jerusalem as well and what Israel has to deal with.
Just understanding Jerusalem itself, the fact that that is the non-negotiable for Israel and throughout the world. I mean, this is the eternal capital for 3,000 years. And yet it's the one factor that every one of the, shall we say, oppositions to Israel in the Islamic world say they must have. They must dominate. They must control. They deny practically there was ever a temple there. Mm-hmm. They will say these things.
So does the UN.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's and they will say that every archaeological activity is simply trying to undermine their mosque and their structures and collapse them. And it's all the political rhetoric that's used with a revisionist history that has come with the Palestinians. But I would say that, when you look at that, you say, yes, you have to invest a lot there because all of the major Jewish feasts have some focus on the Temple Mount. And then the Muslim feast like Ramadan has a huge focus there. And there's always the potential every year for conflict on the Temple Mount. We saw it just a few months ago. Mm-hmm. It's part of what has fomented the reaction at this point, according to Hamas. So that's not going to change unless some dramatic things change. According to the Islamic world, Jerusalem is the catalyst for the next world war. From Islam's point of view.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what can you say except that we need to understand Jerusalem better? I do have a book on that, by the way, Friends of Israel publishes, called Jerusalem in Prophecy,
Yep.
which connects the dots for people to help them understand that behind all of the holy war, religious war, Jerusalem is at the center. And so, yes, that's considered West Bank, but Jerusalem is 60, in the eastern part of Jerusalem, which is considered once West Bank, is 60% of the whole city.
Yeah.
With Hadassah Hospital and Hebrew University and Knesset and Supreme Court, everything is there. And yet that's contested throughout the Islamic world, as though, Israel did not exist. Hamas, of course, has never recognized the existence of the Israeli state, so that's part of it as well.
Steve, I'd like to turn, in our final moments that we have here, I'd like to turn to the support component of the world, the nations supporting Israel. I've been overwhelmed by the support that's going on.
It's fantastic.
But then I've also been overwhelmed by the support of Hamas, which is mind-blowing as well. I don't think those numbers are maybe as high as the support that we're seeing globally for support for Israel. But when I see in France thousands of people with a big Israeli flag, and I see them in Germany, like I think we have a news article here.
We do.
But I want to talk about that with Dr. Price too. But I also want to talk about the support for Hamas and just the other day, yesterday, Rashida Tlaib was chased down by a Fox News journalist.
The only time she's been speechless. It's the only time.
Yeah,
she always has something to say until they asked her about beheading of babies. Do you approve of that? And she just kept walking.
Yeah. Well, they put up a Palestinian flag in many government offices and places around to show support and solidarity with the Palestinian cause, which they consider to be some type of apartheid state or oppressed people. So it's part of a liberal agenda for equity or whatever. Because oftentimes you'll see these, well, I'll get into that, but you'll see one flag by other flags,
yes,
which represent that. They're not looking at the issues. They're not looking at Hamas and that it's been the source, as other parts of the Islamic world, for the suffering of the Palestinians. In other words, it's the Palestinian authorities, it's Hamas, it's the government that has affected the lives of their people. Mm-hmm. To support that supports further persecution and problems for the Palestinian people. I know I have many friends throughout the Palestinian territories, and they will frankly admit that. But they'll stand in solidarity religiously with the causes, but they don't like their government. They know it's corrupt, it's grafting and corruption throughout all those governments.
Well, and that's part of the problem too. We've mentioned this on the program in the past, is that the Abbas administration that's been around much longer than it was supposed to, that administration is hanging on because if they have elections, there's a good chance Hamas could get elected into the West Bank politics of the Palestinian people. They're keeping him in that place, and they all hate him. They don't like him.
Talk about an old guy. He's another old guy.
Yeah, he's what do you call that again?
Elder cocker.
An elder cocker. But the problem is that if there is an actual election, it might not play out well for Israel.
Well, this has to say something about the Palestinian people as a whole. They had a democratic election. They could have elected a democratic government, and they didn't. Hamas. Mm-hmm. Okay, they saw Hamas supporting a lot of the charities and things like this. Was all for political purposes, but the ideology of Hamas, which was totally opposed to the state of Israel, was adopted by them and made their government. And so, how our State Department can't support Hamas because it's on the terrorist list.
Yeah,
as it should be. Should be.
And yet they represent the majority of the Palestinian people.
That's right.
Well, Chris, we do have some news here related to what we're talking about.
Go ahead.
And you have links set up.
I will have them in there.
Emphasize that. The one we talked about that people can access in Germany, which I'll be going to Germany, and hopefully, Chris, for our listeners, we will be doing our second remote. That's
because you're traveling like crazy.
I'm going to be in Germany, and here in Berlin, Brandenburg Gate it's got a Star of David.
That's
Chris.
amazing.
That's a fantastic thing. Then you got Sydney, you got London, 10 Downing Street. In Sydney, you have oh man, look at that Israeli flag on there. And in Miami, of course, Miami Beach, where my people hang out. It's the suburb of New York City.
That's right.
So what's happening there? They've got the word solidarity spelled in English and Hebrew in the Miami World Center skyscraper. Look at that, Chris.
Yes, I love it.
Look, it takes something so awful. I wish they didn't have to do this, but at least they did it in light of what has happened. There is a sense of solidarity, and
even in Kiev,
Yeah,
so
which is in Poland. Which
Well,
is
even
great.
Zelensky had come out and said Israel has a right to defend its. That's a big, powerful voice right now in the world to hear Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, saying Israel has a right to defend itself. I mean, it's a no-brainer to us, but for the rest of the world, they have to hear this because I don't think the world realizes what Israel's about to do. This is a full-scale war. Right. This isn't the previous operations that took place where they're going to throttle things forward and throttle things back. I think this is going to be a full throttle for the next few weeks.
I agree.
And it could spark greater regional battles.
It already is. It's a three-front war, according to the Jerusalem Post. That before I came here, it's not terrible yet, but it's happening. The other news item, we have two more. 1973, there was a person who was in the tank battalion, Avigdor Kahalani. He's a hero in Israel. They recognize him. And in 1973, he held off 1,200 tanks with just a few of his guys. His tank blew up. He'd go to another tank. He's regarded as beloved. Well, there's been another hero that has emerged from here. His name is Yuri Maman, and he was looking for orders. Chris, this is interesting. Our people, you got to have orders, right? Where do we go? He had his tank, but nobody told him anything. So you know what he did? Thank God he did. He told just a group of men, there's our tank. Let's load it up. Get all else stuff we can. He's still trying to contact people. Nobody is there. And he's just stuck. He sees the people out there. He's just shooting at everything he can find. Finally, after a long time and holding off a number of people, finally his commanders come in. He's telling them what they're doing. He held off. He saved his particular area.
Amazing.
And so we have that story for our people there. And then a little humor, Chris.
Before you get to the humor, in light of this, too, I want to say, have you all seen the videos of all the reservists going to battle in Israel? Once you're done with the Israeli army at the age of 21, I think you're in the reserves till you're 40. Is that what
45,
it is?
I think it is. Yeah, something like that.
So you're in the reserves, and I think they had 130% reserve rate that showed up for battle, which means even more people were showing up.
Wait,
that didn't
Chris,
happen.
I got something to show you. You got to.
Are you talking about the cars lined up on the highway?
No, I'm talking about Amir. Wait, it's from Amir Safari.
Yeah.
95-year-old reservist, the oldest reservist. Put it up on camera,
and he's ready to fight. I'll put this up so people can see it. I'll
honestly,
put a link on it.
95-year-old reservist. You know what? You know what it says? Look, I'm sure he'd shoot his gun, but he's just saying, "Move. We got to move. We got to protect our people." And you're never too old. It's your country. I just think that's outstanding.
But the highways are lined with cars because they're all heading to the battlefield and there's nowhere to park. So they just park on the highway and then they walk miles to the battlefield. And you can watch a video of a guy driving and it's just cars parked all along the highways because people are imagine just driving to battle. You're just driving from your home or your job or wherever to battle, and there you are, and there you'll be for a little bit. And they're all willing to serve their country. I was talking with a friend, my brother-in-law yesterday, and he said, I don't know if our country would do that. It's something to process, but it's Israel is they have a great pride. They might be divided on issues, but they have a great pride for their country.
Exactly. I know. I agree with you, and I read a story about a couple recently married in 2019. They live in New York. They love the New York scene. An average Israeli will tell you they get calm. They get like Nirvana in New York compared to what
I've
it's
never
like.
heard that before.
Yeah.
They say they're nice drivers in New York.
They say they're nice drivers. I go there to relax. New York City, because compared to life in Israel. But this New York couple, he got up and turned to his wife and he said, I got to go.
I got to go.
And you know what she said? You do. I mean, that's a wife saying, you got to go. And
there's charter flights for Israelis.
That's right. So he got to the airport and saw all the other reservists, and he arrived safely, and he's there to fight. But Chris, last week we talked about, remember the anti-Semitism in Beechwood? 11,000 out of 14,000 people in a community in Ohio. I know that community very well. And of course, that football team lost 35-3, but they were called Nazis. That's why we talked about anti-Semitism. Well, Dean Kremer, who is a professional Israeli-American pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles, and I just found it out yesterday, and I'm watching the game. He's got a Star of David on his neck, and they're saying, oh, Dean he has family in Israel. He's so concerned. The manager told him, you don't have to pitch today if it's emotionally draining. He said, no, I got to go out there. And he got creamed.
Oh. Is that a sign for Jewish baseball players?
I admire him I was on his side, and boom, a home run. Boom,
and
another home run.
That made news.
Not news that he lost, but news concerning his pride.
100%.
News concerning his character and his family, and unwavering support for the nation of Israel. So even though the Orioles got eliminated and Dean didn't have a great day, we admire him here on the Jew and the Gentile podcast for being willing to
100%.
Get out there, and we're excited about that.
Steve, this is the one Yiddish word of the day that we're doing right here, okay? I know you chose a few, but we're running out of time.
All right.
So why don't you go
We're
ahead
running out of time. We never run out of time. All right, the Yiddish word of the day is Gedenk.
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 What does that mean?
Remember. Chris, that's so appropriate. For the Jewish people, we remember what they went through and what they are going through. And as believers, even in the midst of tribulation, Jesus said, in the world you'll have tribulation, we remember that God has a plan and program, and in the end, his name will be glorified, and he wins the day.
Preach it.
Now, forget the Baltimore Orioles. They lost the day. Jesus Christ will win the day and sit on the throne in Jerusalem as King of Kings.
Gedenk. Remember.
Gedenk. Remember.
Hey, Dr. Price, before you go, and Mrs. Price, before you go, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for putting up with us.
Yeah, how can people get in touch with your ministry, Dr. Price, and all the literature and everything that you're doing, the tours to Israel, everything?
We do have 7 listeners, so they do want to get a hold of you.
We might get 8 now, because
maybe 8.
All right, worldofthebible.com is the website, and you'll find all kind of good free information there. As well as
free.
That's fantastic.
But also information how you can access other resources.
Okay, great. So that's worldofthebible.com.
That's correct.
Everyone, worldofthebible.com. That's for Dr. Price and all the fantastic information that he has. You want to be able to go there, worldofthebible.com. Hey, just a fresh reminder, this Thursday, tomorrow night, we're going to be doing 2 weeks on Shabbat. Dr. Price was talking about the importance of Shabbat for the modern Israeli people. Well, that didn't just come out of thin.
Peter Cologne, our resident scholar.
That's biblical. So we're going to be doing 2 weeks on Shabbat. You can register by going to foiequip.org. Again, that's foiequip.org. Prices, thank you so much for being with us, sharing all your insights, your passion, and your love for Israel and the Jewish people, and your love for the Lord. Hey, everybody, please be praying for Israel right now. We want to seriously be praying for our friends, our loved ones who are over there, and we ask the Lord to protect them and guide them during this difficult time. Hey, we'll see you next week.